will the Chancellor use higher than expected growth to help ease the cost of living crisis? Rishi Sunak left number 11 a short time ago and currently sits beside Boris Johnson at a packed Prime Minister's questions. This is likely to be, frankly, a big budget with decisions not just on tax, but on the spending we can expect from government departments in the near future. We will obviously hear what he has to say in full, and then we'll work out what it means with Robert at Westminster, Anushka here in the studio with me, and Joel, who is sadly self-isolating. COVID, of course, the big underlying factor still in this budget. And indeed at Westminster, Sir Keir Starmer won't be there, having himself just tested positive this morning. Choi, meanwhile, will assess the personal impact of the changes on each and every one of us.
I'm here with people expecting to be directly affected by today's announcements. Different ages, a variety of income levels, a range of backgrounds, all with one thing in common. They are ready to give this budget a robust reality check.
Well, we will be on air for nearly 2 hours, so welcome to Budget Day 2021.
This is the ITV News Chancellor's Budget Special with Tom Bradby.
Good afternoon. It is fair to say we live in a bit of a topsy-turvy economic world. The pandemic was a giant hit, with government borrowing disappearing off the scale. Earlier this year, we had huge tax rises to help pay for it, but growth is bouncing back faster than expected, and the cost of living is rising quickly for all of us. Petrol prices, food, gas, eating out, travel. We are in the middle of a real squeeze. So will the Chancellor use higher growth and therefore tax revenue to help us all out? And if so, how?
With the UN
As you can see, the PM is still on his feet. We expect the Chancellor to follow him in a little over 10 minutes. It will be a budget with far-reaching decisions on spending for the coming years. Many will be pleased to see the Chancellor has changed out of the sliders and socks in the pictures released last night. Not everyone's fashion choice, as much discussed on social media this morning. But let's just cut straight to the substance of what we might expect this afternoon. Our Deputy Political Editor, Anushka, is right here with me. But let's start with Joel, who I said is sadly self-isolating. Sorry about that, Joel. Can we just talk about the overall public finances to begin with, just so we get a sense of the shape of this? We had a huge economic bust with very high borrowing, but growth is coming back much faster than expected. So where do the Chancellor's finances really lie as we start today?
Well, in a better place than they did, Tom, back in March. As you say, the recovery has been far more full-throated and vibrant than the OBR was daring to expect back in March. All sorts of reasons. The vaccination programme and the rollout wasn't clear 6 months ago that it would be quite the success it has. The UK has outperformed, as I'm sure the Chancellor might mention at some point today, the other G7 economies. He's unlikely to mention, of course, the fact that that's in part due to the fact that we have been slightly worse hit. I think the big picture, though, will look better. The Chancellor will be still borrowing eye-popping sums of money, but the big picture will look less horrific than it did back in March. That gives him a bit of room for manoeuvre, a bit of money, potentially, to spend. But my goodness, he's got a lot of drains on his resource. The big thing, the narrative that's going to run through this budget, Tom, is the cost of living. People are looking to see what help he can throw them ahead of what is going to be an extremely tough winter. Energy bills are rising, prices are rising, inflation stalks the land. What can the Chancellor do about it? I suspect not very much, although it may not sound that way from his speech.
OK, Anushka, can I just put that to you? Joel picking out a few big themes there, massive rise or increasing rise in inflation, but he's got more growth to play with and therefore perhaps more tax revenue. What do you think he's likely to be looking at?
I mean, I think he needs that good news to try to help the cost of living squeeze, because it is bad and it's going to get worse. Joel has obviously mentioned inflation, so rising prices. But remember, next April we'll also have a big tax increase, that national insurance increase to pay for health and social care. Add into that the pain that some people are feeling because they've lost that uplift on universal credit. So So what can the Chancellor do? He's going to be looking at different areas. We already know that the minimum wage is going to increase, but with inflation, that might not feel as big as it actually looks. There's also questions around energy bills, both for consumers, but also for businesses that are being really hit hard by this. And then there is that question on universal credit, with mutterings this morning about whether he could perhaps do something there, perhaps not put back in the money that he's already taken out, but allow people to keep more of their benefit as they go back to work. I know that officials have been asking for that. We actually exclusively revealed that last month. The question is, will he actually do it? And if he does, how much difference will it really make?
OK, well, arguably the darkest cloud on the economic horizon is inflation, as we've just been discussing. And we are all feeling it in the supermarkets, on garage forecourts, in our energy bills, certainly. So let's go to our consumer editor, Chris, who's with his panel in Sutton in Ashfield, which is in a red wall constituency, which, of course, shifted to the Tories at the last election. Chris, what are you looking out for there?
Well, thanks, Tom. Our panel here is looking at every detail. Not politicians, not pundits, but all expect to be affected. And Melissa, who's here with her one-year-old, Anton, for you, this is all about that cost of living crunch, isn't it?
It is, yes. So my partner recently had a pay increase, but along with that, we've had, an increase on our energy bills. We've had a council tax increase, and it's just like every time there's a pay increase, everything else increases along with that. So
you're looking for something to alleviate that. Laura's here as well. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
You receive universal credit.
I do, yes.
What do you want to see?
Maybe an increase in the universal credit because of the cut of the COVID payment that we had. The increase of getting to interviews, the bus fare, gas and electric bills.
And that's what you're looking for. You want something to kind of
just to level it out a little bit, yeah.
Particularly when it comes to trying to find work.
Definitely.
OK, Laura, thank you very much indeed. Do join us later for much more from our panel here.
OK, Chris, for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, not long to wait now. We are just moments away from the Chancellor's budget. Prime Minister's Questions is coming to a close. As soon as the PM sits down, Rishi Sunak will be getting to his feet to tell us what he has in store. We will bring you his speech live, so stay with us. Back in a few moments. Welcome back. We are just moments away now from the Chancellor's budget. This is the scene in the Commons as we head towards the end of Prime Minister's questions and the Chancellor prepares to get to his feet. Ed Miliband has been standing in for Sir Keir Starmer, as we said earlier, has sadly for him tested positive for COVID, has implications not just for Prime Minister's questions but for the speech itself, because normally it's the convention that the Leader of the Opposition responds to the Chancellor's speech. Now, our political editor, Robert Peston, will be keeping an eye on things, obviously from the Houses of Parliament. Robert, what do you make of the politics of all this? We've got a tax burden that is, the highest for a very long time from a Tory government. We've got public spending quite high as a proportion of GDP from a Tory government. The politics is kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, just to put some detail on that, the tax burden arguably, says the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the highest sustained level in British history, and public spending highest levels in peacetime. But I don't need to remind any of you that this is a government that has been fighting a crisis since March 2020, 3 months into the after Boris Johnson's landslide, spending more than £400 billion on COVID emergency measures, and more recently endeavouring to, in their words, fix their public finances with £40 billion of tax rises. In March, if you'll remember, business taxes, corporation tax going up, income tax thresholds being frozen, and more recently, after the summer in September, that £14 billion increase in national insurance contributions for people and for businesses. So for a Tory government, massive tax increases, But Boris Johnson would argue that this has been made necessary by an unprecedented health crisis. Now, overnight, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has been briefing that this is the moment where we will begin to see this government's priorities in action. This will be the new post-COVID phase of the government. And it will be very interesting to determine whether or not there is a sort of underlying philosophy here. As you've been talking to Anushka about, we do expect measures to ease this very significant cost of living crisis, which you and I have been chatting about for weeks. I think Anushka's scoop of a few weeks ago about changes to the rate at which universal credit is withdrawn from people as their incomes rise, I suspect to see that made a reality by the Chancellor today. We heard over the summer that the Chancellor would be increasing day-to-day spending on public services by at least 3% for the next 3 years because, as I said to you last night, Tom, the Office for Budget Responsibility has revised up very significantly its growth forecast. There is much more money than the Chancellor thought he had in March to spend, and so I think that increase in day-to-day spending could be a bit above 3%, and that would take us back to sort of the early years of this century, the sort of Blair Brown levels of increases in public spending. Although, as you'll be acutely aware, an enormous amount of that increased public spending is going on the NHS and health because of the terrible problem that hospitals are having in fixing that backlog of treatments that have just been piling up over the COVID crisis. Then there's one other aspect of this which I'm taking a very close interest in, which is what will be happening to the deficit and debt over the next 3 years. My own expectation is because of this improvement in economic growth, we will see the deficit fall broadly to zero or even a bit into surplus in 3 years' time. And indeed, the public debt, currently 100% of GDP, again a record for peacetime, we expect that to stabilise and maybe taper off a bit in 2 or 3 years' time. What does that mean? It means the Chancellor is keeping a bit in reserve because we can't assume there aren't going to be any shocks, and indeed one immediate shock that could indeed happen on Thursday is a rise in interest rates, which in the first year of a rise in interest rates, if that interest rate rise were a full percentage point over the course of the next year, we're not going to see a 1% rise on Thursday, by the way, would cost the Exchequer 10 billion and over 20 billion over 3 years as an annual increase in interest payments. So there are pressures as well as benefits from this increase in the growth rate.
OK, Robert, we will come back to you as soon as the Chancellor is off his feet. But at the moment, you can see one of the Deputy Speakers there, the Chairman of the Ways and Means, who it is convention, chairs the budget debate, who looks as if she is introducing, or in the process of it, the Chancellor. As Robert said, lots to think about, the overall shape of the public finances, how much growth is higher than we originally expected and he predicted in March, therefore how much room that gives him to manoeuvre and how much of a chance that gives us of having a little help in easing the cost of living crisis. But you are looking at a packed House of Commons as we wait for the Chancellor to get to his feet and give us a sense of what to expect over the next few years. Also, critically, the spending review. We will get some big spending decisions here. So let's just get a sense of the atmosphere there.
As Mr. Speaker has said, and all ministers know, important policy announcements should be made first to Parliament. Given there shouldn't be shouts of resign over there, that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about courtesy to this House. Given my responsibilities to the House with regard to the budget, I must put on record my support for Mr. Speaker's stance on this issue and express a firm hope, which I believe is felt on all sides of the House, that we do not find ourselves in this position again at future budgets. But, Chancellor, we are all very much looking forward to hearing the remainder of your announcements, which you're
OK, so this is rather
about
intriguing. The Deputy
to
Speaker, as she introduces him, giving the Chancellor a ticking off, basically, for briefing so much of his budget out before telling MPs what was in it. That's considered discourteous to MPs. They're clearly hacked off about it. And the speakers, both the main speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, and his deputies have made very clear, the speaker previously and now the deputy speaker making very clear they're not too happy about this. And next time the Chancellor should think about telling MPs first what he intends in the budget. Obviously, the reason the Chancellor does brief it out is because he has days of headlines instead of just one day of headlines. And she's... Let's just hear how much further she's going.
We'll put aside all of those matters that we have just addressed and now concentrate. I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer to make his budget statement.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've heard your words and those of Mr. Speaker. I have the greatest respect for you both, and I want to assure you that I have listened very carefully to what you have said. And may I also, Madam Deputy Speaker, send my best wishes to the Leader of the Opposition, and I know the whole House will join me in doing that. And now, with your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn to today's budget. Madam Deputy Speaker, employment is up, investment is growing, public services are improving, the public finances are stabilising, and wages are rising. Today's budget delivers a stronger economy for the British people, stronger growth with the UK recovering faster than our major competitors, stronger public finances with our debt under control, stronger employment with fewer people out of work and more people in work. Growth up, jobs up and debt down. Let there be no doubt our plan is working. Madam Deputy Speaker, this budget is about what this government is about. Investment in a more innovative, high-skilled economy, because that is the only sustainable path to individual prosperity. World-class public services, because these are the common goods from which we all benefit. Backing business, because our future cannot be built by government alone, but must come from the imagination and drive of our entrepreneurs. Help for working families with the cost of living, because we will always give people the support they need and the tools to build a better life for themselves. And levelling up, because for too long, far too long, the location of your birth has determined too much of your future, because the awesome power of opportunity shouldn't be available only to a wealthy few, but be the birthright of every child in an independent and prosperous United Kingdom. Madam Deputy Speaker, today's budget does not draw a line under COVID. We have challenging months ahead. And let me encourage everyone eligible to get their booster jabs as soon as possible. But today's budget does begin the work of preparing for a new economy post-COVID. The Prime Minister's economy of higher wages, higher skills and rising productivity, of strong public services, vibrant communities and safer streets, an economy fit for a new age of optimism, where the only limit to our potential is the effort we are prepared to put in and the sacrifices we are prepared to make. That is the stronger economy of the future, and this budget is the foundation. Madam Deputy Speaker, the House will recognise the challenging backdrop of rising inflation. Let me begin by carefully explaining what is happening in our economy and why. Inflation in September was 3.1% and is likely to rise further, with the OBR expecting CPI to average 4% over the next year. The majority of this rise in inflation can be explained by two global forces. First, as economies around the world reopen, demand for goods has increased more quickly than supply chains can meet. Having been shut down for almost a year, it takes time for factories to scale up production, for container ships to move goods to where demand is, for businesses to hire the people they need. And second, global demand for energy has surged at a time when supplies have already been disrupted, putting a strain on prices. In the year to September, the global wholesale price of oil, coal and gas combined has more than doubled. The pressures caused by supply chains and energy prices will take months to ease. It would be irresponsible for anyone to pretend that we can solve this overnight. I am in regular communication with finance ministers around the world, and it's clear these are shared global problems, neither unique to the UK nor possible for us to address on our own. But where the government can ease these pressures, we will act. To address the driver shortage, the Transport Secretary is introducing temporary visas, tackling testing backlogs, changing cabotage requirements, and is today announcing new funding to improve lorry park facilities. We've already suspended the HGV levy until August, and I can do more today, extending it for a further year until 2023 and freezing vehicle excise duty for heavy goods vehicles. To help with the cost of living, we've introduced a new £500 million household support fund, and today's budget will support working families further. And in terms of our fiscal policy, we are going to meet our commitments on public services and capital investment, but we are going to do so keeping in mind the need to control inflation. And finally, I have written to the Governor of the Bank of England today to reaffirm their remit to achieve low and stable inflation. And people should be reassured they have a strong track record in doing so. I understand people are concerned about global inflation, but they have a government here at home ready and willing to act. And Madam Deputy Speaker, in a period of global uncertainty, you need to work hard to maintain a strong economy and be responsible with the public finances, and that is what we are doing. I'm grateful to the OBR for their work, and I'm pleased to say they now expect our recovery to be quicker. Thanks to this government's actions, they forecast the economy to return to its pre-COVID level at the turn of the year, earlier than they thought in March. Growth this year is revised up from 4 to 6.5%. The OBR then expect the economy to grow by 6% in 2022 and 2.1%, 1.3% and 1.6% over the next 3 years. In July last year, at the height of the pandemic, unemployment was expected to peak at 12%. Today, the OBR expect unemployment to peak at just 5.2%. That means over 2 million fewer people out of work than previously feared. And wages are rising. Compared to February 2020, they have grown in real terms by almost 3.5%. And I can confirm for the House the OBR's forecast for business investment has been revised up over the next 5 years. And because of the actions we took to support our economy, we have been more successful than previously feared in preventing the long-term economic damage of COVID. The OBR have today revised down their scarring assumption from 3% to 2%. In the depths of the worst economic crisis on record, we set out a plan for jobs, a plan that was backed by business groups and trade bodies, a plan that has helped millions of people and saved millions of jobs, a plan that the OBR have today described as remarkably successful. Madam Deputy Speaker, today's forecast confirm beyond doubt our plan for jobs is working. And Madam Deputy Speaker, disruption in the global economy highlights the importance of strong public finances. Coronavirus left us with borrowing higher than at any time since the Second World War. As the Prime Minister reminded us in his conference speech, Higher borrowing today is just higher interest rates and even higher taxes tomorrow. So we need to strengthen our public finances so that when the next crisis comes, we have the fiscal space to act. Today, I am publishing a new Charter for Budget Responsibility. The Charter sets out 2 fiscal rules which will keep this government on the path of discipline and responsibility. First, underlying public sector net debt, excluding the impact of the Bank of England, must, as a percentage of GDP, be falling. Second, in normal times, the state should only borrow to invest in our future growth and prosperity. Everyday spending must be paid through taxation. Both rules must be met by the 3rd year of every forecast period, giving us the flexibility to respond to crises while credibly keeping our public finances under control. These rules are supplemented by targets to spend up to 3% of GDP on capital investment and keep welfare spending on a sustainable path. Madam Deputy Speaker, the House will be asked to vote on our Charter, giving members a simple choice: to abandon our fiscal anchor and leave our economy adrift with reckless, unfunded pledges, or to vote for what we on this side of the House know is the right course: sound public finances and a stronger economy for the British people. Madam Deputy Speaker, important as the Charter is, our credibility comes as much from what we do as what we say. So I'm pleased to tell the House that because our plan is delivering a stronger economy, and because we've taken tough but responsible decisions on public finances, the OBR report today that all our fiscal rules have been met. Underlying debt is forecast to be 85.2% of GDP this year, then 85.4% of GDP in 22-23, before peaking at 85.7% in 23-24. It then falls in the final 3 years of the forecast from 85.1 to 83.3%. Borrowing as a percentage of GDP is forecast to fall in every single year, from 7.9% this year to 3.3% next, then 2.4, 1.7, 1.7 and 1.5% in the following years. Borrowing down, debt down, proving once again it is the Conservatives and only the Conservatives who can be trusted with taxpayers' money. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have made 4 fiscal judgments in this budget. First, we will meet our fiscal rules with a margin to protect ourselves against economic risks. That is the responsible decision at a time of increasing global economic uncertainty, when our public finances are twice as sensitive to changes in interest rates as they were before the pandemic, and 6 times as sensitive as they were before the financial crisis. Just a 1 percentage point in inflation and interest rates would cost us around £23 billion. My second judgment today is to continue supporting working families. Third, as well as helping people at home, our improving fiscal situation means we will meet our obligations to the world's poorest. I told the House that when we met our fiscal tests, we would return to spending 0.7% of our national income on overseas aid. Some people said this was a trick or a device. I told this House it was no such thing, and based on the tests I set out, today's forecasts show that we are, in fact, scheduled to return to 0.7 in 24-25 before the end of this Parliament. And Madam Deputy Speaker, my fourth fiscal judgment is this. Today's budget increases total departmental spending over this Parliament by £150 billion. That's the largest increase this century, with spending growing by 3.8% a year in real terms. As a result of this spending review, and contrary to speculation, there will be a real terms rise in overall spending for every single department. And public sector net investment as a share of GDP will be at the highest sustained level for nearly half a century. If anybody still doubts it, today's budget confirms the Conservatives are the real party of public services. Madam Deputy Speaker, our stronger economy lays the foundation for everything we want to achieve in today's budget. World-class public services and more investment in our future growth. Before I turn to the details, I'd like to thank my right honourable friend, the Chief Secretary. Yeah. Completing the spending review in such challenging circumstances was a tall order, and thankfully we had just the man for the job. Madam Deputy Speaker, at the start of this Parliament, resource spending on healthcare was £133 billion. Today's spending review confirms that by the end of this Parliament, it will increase by £44 billion to over £177 billion. And the extra revenue we're forecast to raise from the Health and Social Care Levy is going direct to the NHS and social care as promised. The health capital budget will be the largest since 2010. Record investment in health R&D, including better newborn screening, as campaigned for by the member for the cities of London and Westminster. 40 new hospitals, 70 hospital upgrades, more operating theatres to tackle the backlog, and 100 community diagnostic centres. All staffed by a bigger, better-trained workforce with 50,000 more nurses and 50 million more primary care appointments. As well as funding to deliver the Prime Minister's historic reforms to social care, we're providing local government with new grant funding over the next 3 years of £4.8 billion, the largest increase in core funding for over a decade. And we're investing more in housing and home ownership too, with a multi-year housing settlement totalling nearly £24 billion. £11.5 billion to build up to the 180,000 new affordable homes, the largest cash investment in a decade, 20% larger than the previous programme. And we're investing an extra £1.8 billion, enough to bring 1,500 hectares of brownfield land into use, meet our commitment to invest £10 billion in new housing, and unlock 1 million new homes. We're also confirming £5 billion to remove unsafe cladding from the highest risk buildings, partly funded by the Residential Property Developers Tax, which I can confirm will be levied on developers with profits over £25 million at a rate of 4%. And we've also reduced rough sleeping by over a third, but we will go further, with £640 million a year for rough sleeping and homelessness, an 85% increase in funding compared to 2019. Madam Deputy Speaker, today's budget funds our ambition to recruit 20,000 new police officers, provides an extra £2.2 billion for courts, prisons and probation services, including £500 million to reduce the courts' backlog, pays for programmes to tackle neighbourhood crime, reoffending, county lines, violence against women and girls, victim services and improved responses to rape cases. And over the next 3 years, commits £3.8 billion to the largest prison building programme in a generation. Madam Deputy Speaker, all governments should aspire to provide greater life chances for future generations. But few governments can match our ambition. So let me now turn to what this budget does to support children. The evidence is compelling that the first 1,001 days of a child's life are the most important. My right honourable friend, My right honourable friend, the member for South Northamptonshire, has recognised this with her inspirational report. And we are responding today with £300 million for a Start for Life offer for families, high-quality parenting programmes, tailored services to help with perinatal mental health. And I'm pleased to tell the member for Congleton funding to create a network of family hubs around the country too, to improve the quality of childcare. We're going to pay providers more, with today's spending review providing an extra £170 million by 24-25. We're confirming £150 million to support training and development for the entire early years workforce, to help up to 300,000 more families facing multiple needs. We're investing an extra £200 million in the Supporting Families programme, and we will provide over £200 million a year to continue the holiday, activity and food programme. Today's spending review also delivers our commitment to schools with an extra £4.7 billion by 24-25, which, combined with the ambitious plans we announced at the spending review of 2019, will restore per-pupil funding to 2010 levels in real terms, equivalent to a cash increase for every pupil of more than £1,500. And for children with special educational needs and disabilities, we are more than tripling the amount we invest to create 30,000 new school places. And we know that the pandemic caused significant disruption to children's learning. We've already announced £3.1 billion to help education recovery. Today, as promised by the Prime Minister and the Education Secretary, we will go further with just under £2 billion of new funding to help schools and colleges, bringing this government's total support for education recovery to almost £5 billion. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we level up public services, we are also levelling up communities, restoring the pride people feel in the places they call home. To do that, we're providing £560 million for youth services, enough to fund up to 300 youth clubs across the country, over £200 million to build or transform 8,000 state-of-the-art community football pitches across the UK, funding to turn over 100 areas of derelict land into new pocket parks, and I'm allocating the first round of bids from the Levelling Up Fund. £1.7 billion to invest in the infrastructure of everyday life in over 100 local areas, with £170 million in Scotland, £120 million in Wales and £50 million in Northern Ireland, more than their Barnet shares. This will benefit the whole United Kingdom. We are backing projects in Aberdeen, Bury, Burnley, Lewes, Clwyd South, and not one, not two, but 3 successful projects for the great city of Stoke-on-Trent. But that's not all. We're also going to fund projects in Ashton-under-Lyne, South Leicester, Sunderland, Doncaster, and West Leeds. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are so committed to levelling up, we are even levelling up the opposition front bench. Madam Deputy Speaker, levelling up is also about protecting our unique culture and heritage. The British Museum, Tate Liverpool, the York Railway Museum, we're investing £800 million to protect museums, galleries, libraries and local culture. And thanks to the Culture Secretary, over 100 regional museums and libraries will be renovated, restored and revived. And she secured up to £2 million to start work on a new Beatles attraction on the Liverpool waterfront. We're also going to review our museum freedoms and make our creative tax reliefs more generous. On current plans, the tax relief for museums and galleries is due to end in March next year, just as exhibitions are starting to tour again. So I've decided to extend it for 2 years to March 2024. And to support theatres, orchestras, museums and galleries to recover from COVID, the tax reliefs for all those sectors from today until April 2023 will be doubled. And they won't return to the normal rate until April 2024. That's a tax relief for culture worth almost a quarter of £1 billion. And Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a budget for the whole United Kingdom. Through the Barnett formula, today's decisions increase Scottish Government funding in each year by an average of £4.6 billion. Welsh Government funding by £2.5 billion and £1.6 billion for the Northern Ireland Executive. This delivers in real terms the largest block grants for the devolved administration since the devolution settlements of 1998. The whole of the United Kingdom will benefit from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and over time we will ramp up funding so that total domestic UK-wide funding will match EU receipts, averaging around £1.5 billion a year. And we will fund projects across the UK, including funding for the Extreme E race in Scotland, the 22 Hebrides X-Prix, accelerating funding for the Cardiff City Region deal in Wales, and funding in Northern Ireland for community cohesion. And whilst today demonstrates the indisputable fiscal benefit of being part of the United Kingdom, this is and always will be secondary to the simple truth that we are bound together by more than transactional benefit. It is our collective history, our culture, and our security. We are and always will be one family, one United Kingdom. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst today's budget delivers historically high levels of public spending, its success will be measured not by the billions we spend, but by the outcomes we achieve and the difference we make to people's lives. The budgets are set, the plans are in place, the task is clear. Now we must deliver, because this isn't the government's money, it's taxpayers' money. Madam Deputy Speaker, our stronger economy allows us to fund world-class public services, the people's priority. But over the long term, the only way to pay for higher spending is economic growth. And if we want to see higher growth, we've got to tackle the problem that's been holding back this country for far too long: our uneven economic geography. As we come out of the worst economic shock we've ever seen, we've got a choice: to retrench or to invest. This government chooses to invest. To invest in our economic infrastructure, to invest in innovation, to invest in skills, to invest in a plan for growth that builds a stronger economy for the future. That's what this budget is about, and that's what this government is about. Madam Deputy Speaker, infrastructure connects our country, drives productivity, and levels up. That's why our national infrastructure strategy invests in economic infrastructure like roads, railways, broadband and mobile, over £130 billion. To connect our towns and cities, we're investing £21 billion on roads and £46 billion on railways. Our integrated rail plan will be published soon, dramatically improving journey times between our towns and cities. And today, we're providing £5.7 billion for London-style transport settlements in Greater Manchester, the Liverpool City region, the Tees Valley, South Yorkshire, West Midlands and the West of England. And we're helping local transport everywhere, with £2.6 billion for a long-term pipeline of over 50 local roads upgrades, over £5 billion for local roads maintenance, enough to fill 1 million more potholes a year, and funding for buses, cycling and walking, totalling more than £5 billion. The Prime Minister promised an infrastructure revolution. This budget delivers an infrastructure revolution. Madam Deputy Speaker, investment in our infrastructure is just the first step. We need to do what the people of this country have always done: invent, discover, and create the ideas and technologies that will change the world. So we will also invest more in innovation. The UK is already a world leader. With less than 1% of the world's population, we have 4 of the world's top 20 universities, 14% of the world's most impactful research, and the second most Nobel laureates. We want to go further. I can confirm we will maintain our target to increase R&D investment to £22 billion. But in order to get there and deliver on our other priorities, we'll reach the target in 26-27, spending by the end of this Parliament £20 billion a year on R&D. That's a cash increase of 50%, the fastest increase ever. And I can confirm for the House that this £20 billion is in addition to the cost of our R&D tax reliefs. Combined with those tax reliefs, total public investment in R&D is increasing from 0.7% of GDP in 2018 to 1.1% of GDP by the end of the Parliament. How does 1.1% compare internationally? Well, the latest available data shows an OECD average of just 0.7%. Germany investing 0.9%, France 1%, and the United States just 0.7%. This unprecedented funding will increase core science funding to £5.9 billion per year by 24-25, a cash increase of 37%. Meet the full cost of associating with Horizon Europe. Establish the new Advanced Research and Invention Agency with £800 million by 25-26, and strengthen our focus on late-stage innovation, increasing Innovate UK's annual core budget to £1 billion, double what it was at the start of this Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, there's more to becoming a science superpower than just what the government spends on R&D. Our ambitious net zero strategy is also an innovation strategy, investing £30 billion to create the new green industries of the future. We've just issued our second green bond, making us the 3rd largest issuer of sovereign green bonds anywhere in the world. London last week was named the best place in the world for green finance, and on Monday, the new UK Infrastructure Bank announced its first ever investment, £107 million to support offshore wind in Teesside. And to build on this work, 1 week today, I'll be hosting global finance ministers and businesses at COP26. And Madam Deputy Speaker, innovation comes from the imagination, drive, and risk-taking of business. That's why we've launched Help to Grow for turbocharged SME productivity, started a new co-investment venture capital fund, Future Fund Breakthrough. It's why I'm announcing today we will consult on further changes to the regulatory charge cap for pension schemes, unlocking institutional investment whilst protecting savers. It's why we're introducing a new £1.4 billion Global Britain Investment Fund, supporting transformative economic activity and our world-leading sectors like life sciences. And it's why today's budget increases the British Business Bank's regional financing programmes to £1.6 billion, expanding their coverage and helping innovative businesses get access to the finance they need across the whole United Kingdom. Madam Deputy Speaker, a third of our science Nobel laureates have been immigrants. Half of our fastest growing companies have a foreign-born founder. So an economy built on innovation must be open and attractive to the best and brightest minds. Thanks to our brilliant Home Secretary, today's budget confirms the eligibility criteria for our new scale-up visa, making it quicker and easier for the fast-growing businesses to bring in highly skilled individuals. And the Trade Secretary's new Global Talent Network, launching initially in the Bay Area, Boston and Bangalore, will identify, attract and relocate the best global talent in science and tech sectors. all part of our plan to make our visa system for international talent the most competitive in the world. Madam Deputy Speaker, if we want greater private sector innovation, we need to make our research and development tax reliefs fit for purpose. The latest figures show the UK has the second highest spending on R&D tax reliefs in the OECD, yet it's not working as well as it should. UK business investment in R&D is less than half the OECD average. We've reviewed the reliefs and identified two issues we are solving today. First, the reliefs need to reflect how businesses conduct research in the modern world. So, as many companies have called for, I'm expanding the scope of the reliefs to include cloud computing and data costs. The second problem is this. Companies claimed UK tax relief on £48 billion of R&D spending. Yet UK business investment was around half of that, at just £26 billion. We are subsidising billions of pounds of R&D that isn't even happening here in the United Kingdom. That's unfair on British taxpayers, and it puts us out of step with places like Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, Singapore, Switzerland, and the USA, who have all focused their R&D tax reliefs on domestic activity. So from April 2023, we are going to do the same and incentivise greater investment here at home. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, £22 billion investment in R&D, the Net Zero Strategy, the Future Fund, Help to Grow, more regional finance, unlocking institutional capital, a more competitive visa system, and a modernised R&D tax credits regime. Enough action to prove the hypothesis we are making this country a science and technology superpower. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, as well as investing in infrastructure and innovation, there is one further part of our plan for growth that is crucial: providing a world-class education to all our people. Higher skills lead to higher regional productivity, and higher productivity leads to higher wages. With 80% of the UK's 2030 workforce already in work, our future success depends not just on the schooling we give our children, but the lifelong learning we offer to adults. We've already done a lot. Our plan for jobs invested in apprenticeships, traineeships, and the Kickstart scheme, but we need to go further. Today's budget invests in the most wide-ranging skills agenda this country has seen in decades. We are increasing skills spending over the Parliament by £3.8 billion, an increase of 42%. We're expanding T-levels, building institutes of technology, rolling out the Prime Minister's Lifetime Skills Guarantee, upgrading our FE College estate, quadrupling the number of places on skills boot camps, and significantly increasing funding for apprenticeships. We are also going to tackle a tragic fact. Millions of adults in our country have numeracy skills lower than those expected of a 9-year-old. According to the leading charity, National Numeracy, this costs individuals with poor numeracy up to £1,600 a year in lost earnings. People with poor numeracy skills are more than twice as likely to be unemployed as their peers. So today, I can announce a new UK-wide numeracy programme, Multiply. With £560 million, Multiply will improve basic math skills and help to change people's lives across the whole United Kingdom. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're building our infrastructure with new roads, railways and broadband, cementing our status as a science and technology superpower, and strengthening the skills of our people, the country's greatest asset. That is a real plan for growth, and that's how this government is building a stronger economy for the British people. Madam Deputy Speaker, world-class public services are the people's priority. Investment in infrastructure, innovation and skills will create the growth that we need to pay for them. But as Conservatives, we know that government action alone won't be enough to create a stronger economy. We want this country to be the most exciting and dynamic place in the world for business. And now that we've left the EU, we have the freedom to do things differently and deliver a simpler, fairer tax system. I want to begin with one of our smallest taxes, but a tax which plays an important role in one of our preeminent industries, shipping. Now that we've left the EU, today we start reforming our tonnage tax regime to make it simpler and more competitive. And we're also making it fairer for UK taxpayers. When we were in the old EU system, ships in the tonnage tax regime were required to fly the flag of an EU state. But that doesn't make sense for an independent nation, so I can announce today that our tonnage tax will, for the first time ever, reward companies for adopting the UK merchant shipping flag, the red ensign. That is entirely fitting for a country with such a proud maritime history as ours. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am sure the opposition will be delighted that red flags are still flying somewhere in this country, even if they are all at sea. Let me turn now to air passenger duty. Right now, people pay more for return flights with and between the 4 nations of the United Kingdom than they do when flying home from abroad. We used to have a return leg exemption for domestic flights, but were required to remove it in 2001. But today, I can announce that flights between airports in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will, from April 2023, be subject to a new, lower rate of air passenger duty. This will help cut the cost of living, with 9 million passengers seeing their duty cut by half. It will bring people together across the United Kingdom. And because they tend to have a greater proportion of domestic passengers, it is a boost to regional airports like Aberdeen, Belfast, Inverness and Southampton. Airports are major regional employers. So to help them get through the winter, I'm also extending our support for English airports for a further 6 months. We're also making changes to reduce carbon emissions from aviation. Most emissions come from international rather than domestic aviation. So we are introducing from April 2023 a new ultra-long-haul band in air passenger duty covering flights of over 5,500 miles with an economy rate of £91. Less than 5% of passengers will pay more, but those who fly furthest will pay the most. Madam Deputy Speaker, our approach to corporate taxation strikes a responsible balance between funding public services and encouraging the investment we need for a stronger economy. At the March budget, we took the difficult but necessary decision to increase the rate of corporation tax to 25% from 2023. Still, the lowest rate in the G7 and the 5th lowest rate in the G20. Alongside, I introduced the new super deduction, the biggest business tax cut in modern British history, and extended to the end of this year the annual investment allowance at its higher level of £1 million. Now is not the time to remove tax breaks on investment, so I can confirm today that the £1 million annual investment allowance will not end in December as planned. It will be extended all the way to March 2023. I also said in March that I would review the bank surcharge within corporation tax to maintain the competitiveness of our financial services industry. We will retain a surcharge of 3%. The overall rate for corporation tax on banks will, in 2023, increase from 27% to 28% and will remain higher than the rate paid by other companies. Small challenger banks are improving banking competition, which is good for the sector and good for consumers. So to help them, I will also raise the annual allowance to £100 million. Madam Deputy Speaker, our manifesto promised to review business rates. We're publishing our conclusions today. But before I set out our plans, let me say this. We on this side of the House are clear that reckless, unfunded promises to abolish a tax which raises £25 billion every year are completely irresponsible. It would be wrong to find £25 billion a year in extra borrowing, cuts to public services or tax rises elsewhere. So we will retain business rates, but with key reforms to ease the burden and create stronger high streets. First, we will make the business rate system fairer and timelier, with more frequent revaluations every 3 years. The new revaluation cycle will be delivered from 2023. Second, as called for by the Federation of Small Business and the British Property Federation, we're introducing a new investment relief to encourage businesses to adopt green technologies like solar panels. And I'm announcing today that we'll accept the CBI and the British Retail Consortium's recommendation to introduce a new business rates improvement relief. From 2023, every single business will be able to make property improvements and for 12 months pay no extra business rates. That means a hotel adding extra rooms, a manufacturer expanding their factory, an office adding new air conditioning, CCTV or bike shelters will all pay no extra rates. Together with the new green investment relief, we're introducing investment incentives totalling £750 million. This will make a difference, but without action, millions of businesses would see their tax bills going up next year because of inflation. I want to help those businesses right now. So our third step is that next year's planned increase in the multiplier will be cancelled. That's a tax cut for businesses worth over the next 5 years £4.6 billion. And I have one final measure to help those businesses hardest hit by the pandemic. I'm announcing today, for 1 year, a new 50% business rates discount for businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. Pubs, music venues, cinemas, restaurants, hotels, theatres and gyms. Any eligible business can claim a discount on their bills of 50% up to a maximum of £110,000. That is a business tax cut worth almost £1.7 billion. Together with small business rate relief, this means that over 90% of all retail, hospitality and leisure businesses will see a discount of at least 50%. Apart from the COVID reliefs, this is the biggest single-year tax cut to business rates in over 30 years. Madam Deputy Speaker, taken together, today's budget cuts business rates by £7 billion. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are unleashing the dynamism and creativity of British businesses with a simpler, fairer and more competitive tax system. The biggest business tax cut in modern British history, the biggest single-year tax cut to business rates for 30 years, £1 million investment allowance, tonnage tax reformed, air passenger duty cut. That is the way to back business and build a stronger economy. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn now to alcohol duties. First introduced in 1643 to help pay for the Civil War, our alcohol duty system is outdated, complex and full of historical anomalies. The Institute of Fiscal Studies have called it, in their words, a mess. The Institute of Economic Affairs said it defies common sense. And the World Health Organization have warned that countries like the UK, which follow the EU rules, are, and I quote, unable to implement tax systems that are optimal from the perspective of public health. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, today we are taking advantage of leaving the EU to announce the most radical simplification of alcohol duties for over 140 years. We are taking 5 steps today to create a system that is simpler, fairer, and healthier. First, to radically simplify the system, we are slashing the number of main duty rates from 15 to just 6. Our new system will be designed around a common sense principle. The stronger the drink, the higher the rate. This means that some drinks, like stronger red wines, fortified wines, or high-strength white ciders, will see a small increase in their rates because they are currently undertaxed given their strength. That's the right thing to do, and it will help end the era of cheap, high-strength drinks which can harm public health and enable problem drinking. And because this is a more rational system, the converse is also true. Many lower alcohol drinks are currently overtaxed and have been for many decades. Rosé, fruit ciders, liqueurs, lower strength beers and wines, today's changes mean that they will pay less. The second step I'm taking today will encourage small, innovative craft producers. I'm announcing proposals for a new small producer relief. This will extend the principle of small brewers relief to include, for the first time ever, small cider makers and other producers making alcoholic drinks of less than 8.5%. Third, I'm going to modernise the system to reflect the way that people drink today. Over the last decade, consumption of sparkling wines, like Prosecco, has doubled. English sparkling wine has increased almost tenfold. It's clear they are no longer the preserve of wealthy elites. And they are no stronger than still wines. So I'm going to end the irrational duty premium of 28% that they currently pay. Sparkling wines, wherever they are produced, will now pay the same duty as still wines of equivalent strength. And because growing conditions in the UK typically favour lower strength and sparkling wines, this means English and Welsh wines, compared with stronger imported wines, will now pay less. Sales of fruit cider have increased from 1 in 1,000 ciders sold in 2005 to 1 in 4 today. But they can pay 2 or 3 times as much duty as cider that is made with apples or pears. So we are cutting the duty on them too. The fourth step I'm taking today will directly support the home of British community life for centuries, our pubs. Even before the pandemic, pubs were struggling. Between 2000 and 2019, consumption in the on-trade fell by 40%. And many public health bodies recognise that pubs are often safer drinking environments than being at home. So, as the members for Dudley South and North West Durham will agree, a fairer, healthier system supports pubs. So I can announce today draft relief. Draft relief will apply a new, lower rate of duty on draft beer and cider. It will apply to drinks served from draft containers over 40 litres. It will particularly benefit community pubs who do 75% of their trade on draft. And let me tell the House the new rate. Draft relief will cut duty by 5%. That is the biggest cut to cider duty since 1923. The biggest cut to fruit ciders in a generation. The biggest cut to beer duty for 50 years. This is not temporary. It's a long-term investment in British pubs of £100 million a year and a permanent cut in the cost of a pint of 3p. And I cannot wait, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the opposition to accuse me tomorrow of beer barrel politics. Madam Deputy Speaker, these much-needed reforms will come into effect in February 2023. but I want to help the hospitality industry right now. So, for my final announcement on alcohol duties today, I can confirm that the planned increase in duty on spirits like Scotch whisky, wine, cider and beer will all, from midnight tonight, be cancelled. That's a tax cut worth £3 billion. Madam Deputy Speaker, our reforms make the alcohol duty system simpler, fairer and healthier. They help with the cost of living while tackling problem drinking. They support innovative entrepreneurs and craft producers. They back pubs and public health. And they are only possible because we've left the European Union. Madam Deputy Speaker, world-class public services, investment in infrastructure, innovation and skills, simpler, fairer taxes to support businesses and consumers, all built on the foundation of a stronger economy and responsible public finances. That is our vision for the future, and that is what this budget delivers. And this budget also supports working families. Madam Deputy Speaker, with fuel prices at the highest level in 8 years, I'm not prepared to add to the squeeze on families and small businesses. So I can confirm today the planned rise in fuel duty will be cancelled. That's a saving over the next 5 years of almost £8 billion. Compared to pre-2010 plans, today's freeze means the average tank of fuel will cost around £15 less per car, £30 less for vans, £130 less for HGVs. After 12 consecutive years of frozen rates, the average car driver will now save a total of £1,900. Madam Deputy Speaker, I can also announce today that public sector workers will see fair and affordable pay rises across the whole spending review period as we return to the normal, independent pay-setting process. And I can take action to help the lowest paid as well. It was a Conservative government that introduced the national living wage in 2016. A Conservative government that, according to statistics published just yesterday, has overseen the proportion of people in low-paid work falling to its lowest level since 1997. And it is a Conservative government that is increasing the wage floor again today. The Independent Low Pay Commission brings together economists, business groups and trades unions. The government is accepting their recommendation to increase the national living wage next year by 6.6% to £9.50 an hour. For a full-time worker, that's a pay rise worth over £1,000. It will benefit over 2 million of the lowest paid workers in the country. It's broadly consistent with previous increases and keeps us on track for our target of 2/3 of median earnings by 2024. And it is a major commitment to the high-wage, high-skill, high-productivity economy of the future. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we build this stronger economy, we're doing so at the end of an extraordinary 18 months. COVID wasn't just a public health challenge. It wasn't just an economic challenge. It was a moral challenge too. We had to show that we could pull together as a country, and we did. We had to put aside questions of ideology and orthodoxy to do whatever it took to care for our people and each other, and we did. There's a different kind of moral dimension to the economic challenge we face now. Last year, the state grew to be over half the size of the total economy. Taxes are rising to their highest level as a percentage of GDP since the 1950s. I don't like it, but I cannot apologise for it. It is the result of the unprecedented crisis we faced and the extraordinary action we took in response. But now we have a choice. Do we want to live in a country where the response to every question is what is the government going to do about it? Where every time prices rise, every time a company gets in trouble, every time some new challenge emerges, the answer is always the taxpayer must pay? Or do we choose to recognise that government has limits? Government should have limits. If this seems a controversial statement to make, then I'm all the more glad for saying it, because that means it needed saying, and it is what we believe. There is a reason we talk about the importance of family, community, and personal responsibility, not because these are an alternative to the market or the state. It's because they are more important than the market or the state. The moments that make life worth living aren't created by government, aren't announced by government, aren't granted by government. They come from us as people, our choices, our sacrifices, our efforts. And we believe people should keep more of the rewards of those efforts. Yes, we've taken some corrective action to fund the NHS and get our debt under control. But as we look towards the future, I want to say this simple thing to the House and the British people. My goal is to reduce taxes. By the end of this Parliament, I want taxes to be going down, not up. I want this to be a society that rewards energy, ingenuity and inventiveness, a society that rewards work. That is what we believe on this side of the House. That is my mission over the remainder of this Parliament. And the final announcement in today's budget takes a first step. Madam Deputy Speaker, for many of the lowest paid in society, there is a hidden tax on work. The universal credit taper withdraws support as people work more hours. The rate is currently 63%, so for every £1 someone earns, their universal credit is reduced by 63p. Let us be in no doubt, this is a tax on work, and a high rate of tax at that. Organisations as varied as the Trades Union Congress, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the Resolution Foundation, the Centre for Policy Studies and the Centre for Social Justice have all said it is too high. So, to make sure work pays and help some of the lowest income families in our country keep more of their hard-earned money, I have decided to cut this rate, not by 1%, not by 2%, but by 8%. This is a tax on working people, and we are cutting it from 63 to 55%. The rate originally envisaged by my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford. And because I'm also increasing the work allowances by £500, this is a tax cut next year worth over £2 billion. Nearly 2 million families will keep, on average, an extra £1,000 a year. Changes like this normally take effect at the start of the new tax year in April. But we want to help people right now. So we will introduce this within weeks and no later than December the 1st. Let me tell the House what these changes mean. A single mother of two, renting and working full-time on the national living wage, will be better off by around £1,200. A couple renting a home with their 2 children, one working full-time, the other working part-time, will be better off every single year by £1,800. This is a £2 billion tax cut for the lowest paid workers in our country. It supports working families, it helps with the cost of living, and it rewards work. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, fuel duty cut, air passenger duty cut, alcohol duty cut, the biggest cut to business rates in 30 years. Growth up, jobs up, wages up. Public finances back in a better place, more investment in infrastructure, innovation and skills, a pay rise for over 2 million people and a £2 billion tax cut for the lowest paid. This budget helps with the cost of living. This budget levels up to a higher wage, higher skill, higher productivity economy. This budget builds a stronger economy for the British people, and I commend it to the House.
OK, Rishi Sunak sits down after what was, on any analysis, a very impactful budget. Lots of measures, lot to discuss. We're just waiting, though, and we'll listen to Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, getting onto her feet to respond. Normally, this would be Keir Starmer, the Leader of the Opposition. It's tradition that the Leader of the Opposition responds to the budget, but he has tested positive with COVID this morning. He therefore can't do it, and Rachel Reeves is having to step in. Fascinating to see how she's going to respond to this. The universal credit, rabbit out of the hat tax cut at the end there was predicted by Anushka. She broke the story of it a little while ago. So we'll come to her immediately to get her response, what it means, how much it's going to mean financially to people who benefit. But for Labour, difficult to know how they respond to this. I suspect they'll focus on the fact that, yes, there are big public spending increases, but really only taking us back to 2010 and pre-austerity. And no doubt there will be a debate about whether those years of austerity were really needed after all. But a big budget, big announcements, lots of impact. Inflation at 4%, that's clearly a worry. The target hasn't changed, it's 2%, so it's running quite high over the target. We've then got some very significant increases in public spending across the board. By our calculation, 3.8% a year in real terms. That's going to make a significant difference to departments. Big increases on things like local government and housing. But again, really only taking us back to 2020. Big tax cut at the end, but don't forget there have been big tax rises this year, so that is really to some extent reversing the universal credit. Anusha, can I just bring you in very quickly whilst we're waiting for Rachel Reeves, just in brief on the universal credit?
Yeah. So just to explain what has happened there, when you get into work, you get your universal credit taken off you at this enormous rate. It has been 63p out of every pound that you earn. So say you earn an extra 100 quid, you only get 37 pounds of that because the rest is your benefit taken away from you. Now, people were speculating that he might reduce it by 3. That was what, as I understood it, officials were pushing for. To bring it down this much is pretty huge. That means you can keep 45 pounds of it. It's a big change. It's also what was originally envisaged by Ian Duncan Smith when he created this system. He believed that for universal credit to work properly, you had to incentivise people back into work by taking their benefit off them more slowly. So that is unquestionably a very, very big rabbit for Rishi Sunak. What some would say is that what you're not doing is helping those who are out of work or helping those who are below the threshold, if you like, and who aren't making as much money.
OK, let's come back to that in a moment, but let's hear what Rachel Reeves has to say.
Families struggling with the cost of living crisis. Businesses hit by a supply chain crisis. Those who rely on our schools and our hospitals and our police. They won't recognise the world that the Chancellor is describing. They will think that he is living in a parallel universe. The Chancellor in this budget has decided to cut taxes for banks. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, at least the bankers on short-haul flights sipping champagne will be cheering this budget today. And the arrogance, after taking £6 billion out of the pockets of some of the poorest people in this country, expecting them to cheer today for £2 billion given to compensate. In the long story of this Parliament, never has a Chancellor ask the British people to pay so much for so little. Time and again today, the Chancellor compared the investments that he is making to the last decade. But who was in charge? Who was in charge in this last decade? They were. So let's just reflect on the choices that Chancellor has made today. The highest sustained tax burden in peacetime. And who is going to pay for it? It's not international giants like Amazon. No, the Chancellor has found a tax deduction for them. It's not property speculators. They've already pocketed a stamp duty cut. And it's clearly not the banks, even though bankers' bonuses are set to reach a record high this year. Instead, the Chancellor is loading the burden on working people. A national insurance tax rise on working people. A council tax hike on working people, and no support today for working people with VAT on their gas and electricity bills. And what are working people getting in return? A record NHS waiting list with no plan to clear it, no way to see a GP, and still having to sell their home to pay for social care. Community policing, nowhere to be seen. A court backlog leaving victims without justice. And almost every rape going unprosecuted.
OK, Rachel Rees responding there on behalf of the Labour Party, focusing, apart from anything else, on the very high tax burden, the highest in peacetime, she says. An interesting attack, has to be said, for the Labour Party on the government. Now, our coverage of what is going on in the Chamber, our budget coverage from the Commons, continues online. That's at ITV.com/news, as well as on our social media channels. So if you want to follow it live, the conversation is there. Can I just come back, Anushka, to you, though, because, you know, there's been all this debate and somewhat heated controversy about the government's decision to remove the uplift in universal credit that people got during the COVID crisis. How much does what we've just heard in that rabbit out of the hat at the end reverse that for families who are struggling?
Well, these two things target two slightly different groups of people. You know, officials working in government were desperate to keep that £20 uplift. It's going to cost many families £1,000 a year. And if you are either out of work completely or you earn below a certain threshold, then you have lost that money and it has gone. This doesn't make any difference to you. But the reason that officials started pushing for this instead of that original uplift was because they know that Rishi Sunak, as a Chancellor, wants to be someone who is thinking about work all the time, getting people into work. And he is right to say that there is an effective tax rate when people move off universal credit into work, which is eye-watering. 63 pence in every pound you earn taken off you from your benefit. On top of that, national insurance. The poorest people in the country are facing a 75% effective tax rate. So hugely significant that he has reduced that, and that will be a lot more money for the people at the top end of universal credit who are moving back into work and earning more. Different groups of people, so lots of charities will still say this is going to be really hard and really brutal for those at the bottom of the pile. A lone parent on minimum wage, for example, will still be hit next year, but unquestionably lots of people will welcome the idea that that incentive has improved. And if Ian Duncan-Smith and his Centre for Social Justice is correct about this, then the argument is that by incentivising people back into work, you take them off the benefit completely, and in the end, the Treasury doesn't have to pay as much as it has to right now. OK, well, let's go and chat to Joel about all this. Joel, all of us, haven't we, sat through so many budgets, and they vary from the very, very newsworthy with an awful lot in it to the not so much. What's your overall, I mean, big figures in this, predictions about inflation, big public spending increases. What's your overall reaction to it?
Oh, this is a biggie. I mean, look, there's lots to dive into. Just on the Anushka's point, making the £20 a week uplift universal credit permanent would have cost the Chancellor something like £7 billion a year to support around 5 million families. He's saying adjusting the taper is going to cost him around £2 billion a year. He doesn't say how many families that will support. I'm sure others will be doing the calculations as we speak, but to be clear, it's not as generous. It is help, but it's not as generous as the uplift was. Goodness, where do you go with this? I mean, I think a fundamental assessment that the OBR has made, Tom, is around this long-term scarring that COVID will cause. It thinks it's far less pessimistic. 2% will be of GDP will be hit, not 3%. That gives given the Chancellor clearly a lot of room for manoeuvre with the figures. It means higher growth going forward, higher tax receipts. But my goodness, he sounds like he's been spending things like billio. Just look at the list of tax cuts that he's offering. A fuel duty freeze, the 12th in succession. What does that say about his net zero commitments? It will be a popular one, though, with pump prices at record highs. Reform to alcohol duty is in effect a £3 billion tax cut. Business rates reform. Wow, this is very significant. A 50% discounts for hotels, retail and leisure businesses. My goodness, they're up against it at the moment. The pandemic is over, restrictions are lifting, but COVID is still with us and they are struggling. They will like this, but that's worth £7 billion a year. It's not clear where this money's coming from yet.
OK, Joel, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go to Chris Choi with his panel in Nottinghamshire to see how they reacted.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, our panel sat through that blitz of policy and politics. Let's get in as much as we can. First of all, Melissa, when it came to families, we had talk of these family hubs.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to be a good move?
Yeah, I think that's going to be very welcomed, actually, especially with, the pandemic last year and what we saw, was a big decrease, of, family services. So I think it'll be great to get some sort of community network back, especially for young families.
Thanks, Melissa. So good timing for you and possibly for your son here, Anton. Laura, you're on universal credit. We've seen those changes now, that people on that credit can keep more of their money as they earn more.
Yeah.
Is that a big step forward in your view?
It is a big step forward, but I think the decrease in the £20 a week that people are losing, that's a disadvantage to get to interviews and that kind of thing, that when you want to get back into the restaurant trade or, to any kind of job, really.
And also relevant for you looking for work in future was all that talk about new skills, particularly numeracy.
Oh, definitely. That's a bit, especially around this area as well.
Is it workable around here? Are there the facilities?
Not as many, but there is the big community centre at the top. That's where I'm going. So.
Let me talk to Aaron. Aaron, your family owns a convenience store. A lot of changes there to business rates. They've been called for a long time, I know. Will it make a difference, do you think, around here?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely welcome the 50% cut from the Chancellor. However, it's a lot of tinkering around the edges. It's only for 1 year. Businesses need assurances of what's going to happen into the future, and particularly for small businesses, there's not been enough detail.
Let's come over to Chante. Chante, you're a student. You're listening out for those changes to education, particularly the T levels, a kind of technical A level, if you like, or O level. What do you make of that?
So unlike BTECs, T-Levels are actually going to require English and Maths qualifications, which is actually quite upsetting as it's going to deter those who actually have to resit their exams from going on to further education. Unfortunately for working class students who always tend to statistically underperform in their GCSEs, it means they're now going to face even more socioeconomic problems and not going to be able to climb up the social ladder like they could.
Chante, thank you for those thoughts. Paul, you run a social care business round here, providing home care. Now, we saw some pretty big figures there, £4.8 billion going into social care.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that cause for celebration in your view?
I think any income, any extra money for local authorities is always welcomed. A bit of trepidation in the respect that for the last decade there have actually been cuts to the local authorities, so it'll be interesting to see where the money gets split up to. But any money that may possibly get towards us in adult social care will be more than welcomed.
Now, at the moment, you've got a staff shortage, I know, in your social care business. There was talk there from the Chancellor of making it easier to bring in high-skilled employees from overseas. You're not really in that category. What's going to happen with your problem, do you think?
No, unless we get some more funding from local authority, really, to see, our staff are highly trained, highly skilled, and the minimum wage and things have come up over a period of time. Unless we can see more funding from local authority to try and increase that and attract more people into the job, I think we'll still struggle with our workforce for the foreseeable, really.
Just one quick final thought from you on that freeze-in petrol duty, because that I know will have ramifications for a lot of people.
Yep.
Good news for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, anything that reduces the cost to the, to our workforce in terms of travelling around the community and providing that care is always welcome. It'd be interesting to see how long that stays for, but yeah, it's a good thing.
Paul, thank you. And thanks to all of our panel. I mean, that range of reactions shows just how wide the impact of today's budget is going to be.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Well, Robert has got out of the press gallery and down to the ground floor at Westminster. Robert, there was a lot in that. What would you pick out?
So look, I've got in my hands the Red Book, which gives us the actual cost of what was announced today. I'm going to pick out the big numbers. So universal credit, that reduction in the taper we've been talking about, that will cost £2.5 billion a year by 2024 to 25, well over £2 billion next year. Business rate relief next year, that special 50% relief for retail, hospitality and leisure sectors, almost £2 billion, but it's only 1 year. The freezing of the multiplier relating to business rates will cost just short of £1 billion a year. So quite a lot of help for businesses with premises, particularly in the struggling retail and leisure sectors. Now, one thing that really stood out for me is you will remember that they abolished the triple lock, where they said that the triple lock was a manifesto commitment to increase pensions and pension credit in line with inflation. Some of us thought that was a one-off. It's not a one-off. It's going to run through the Parliament, and it's going to be raising £5 to £6 billion every single year to the end of the Parliament, which is a colossal amount of money raised by the government, and it actually is one reflection of one of the things that the Chancellor was talking about. He did not cite this in his budget speech today, which he's very worried about inflation and the impact that will have on the public finances, and he's taken steps to protect himself at some cost of pensioners. Overall, and this is the big thing I want to share with you, this is a very, very expansionary budget, mostly because of public spending increases, an enormous amount going to health, but in other departments as well. The increase in public spending will be, believe it or not, £38 billion in the next fiscal year, but there will be associated with that £13 billion of tax increases. We know about most of those. They were the national insurance rise that we learned about in September. But the net expansion next year is £25 billion, £22 billion the following year. This is an expansionary budget. It may well give the Bank of England confidence to do something that many are fearful about on Thursday, which is to push up interest rates.
OK, Robert, never happier and never more pleased to see you than buried in the Red Book with all the statistics hidden in the back of it, particularly interesting there about the triple lock. It's been great to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining us. We're coming to the end of our coverage, which continues online. A fascinating budget in every conceivable way, full of measures, the politics in it, very interesting. So do join Mary on the evening news. We'll be back for News at 10, obviously, here to look at it all. But for now, thank you very much indeed for joining us.